Halloween is a special time for young people. The one night of the year that they get to dress up as their favorite movie, video game, or comic book characters. Wander the streets with like-minded youngsters collecting candy from strangers with smiling faces. For Maureen Smith, a Halloween night in the 1970s would be one she would never forget. For it was the night she discovered that monsters really do exist. Maureen, then 12, was excited about the prospect of going trick-or-treating with her brother and two cousins. Her parents' house in England was about 2 doors down from the bottom of a street, at which stood a small field with shed-style garages sitting at the top end. The streets in her neighborhood were fairly narrow. You couldn't double park a car, she remembered. As Maureen waited for her father to put a string through her lantern, her impatient brother and cousins started off down the street, beginning their night of fun. I could hear them going into the street, leaving me behind. Dad got the strings sorted and lit my candle, and I was away, out to join my siblings. I walked to the bottom of the street and couldn't see my family, but I could hear their muffled voices and voices of other kids from our streets. Maureen claims she went out to the field, which was partially obscured by the garages, and observed a kind of shimmer around the edge, like a fog. The air felt heavy and thick, she recalled. She could still hear the muffled voices, but no one was in sight. She kept walking, looking about. Where had they all gone? Now standing between two garages, Maureen suddenly felt as though she was being watched. She turned to her left and saw something straight out of a horror movie. Only this was real. This was not some kid in a costume. This thing was real, and it was standing next to her. The best word she could find to describe it was gargoyle. Its eyes were sort of pearl-colored, and it was probably a foot taller than me. We looked at each other, and that's it. That's all I can remember. Maureen's next conscious memory was waking up in her parents' kitchen in her armchair. Her lantern, which was still lit, was sitting on the table. There's another account from Alton, Illinois involving a young girl and a gargoyle-like creature. Some of my longtime listeners might remember it. Mary Ledbetter claims that in the late 1960s, when she was around 6 years old, she was with a group of children playing in the woods when she had her encounter. Mary claims that she and some friends were running to their clubhouse when Mary fell behind. She was suddenly stopped in her tracks by something that grabbed her by the back of her head. She swung around and was confronted by a creature she described as a cross between a gargoyle, a bat, and a devil. It paralyzed her where she stood. None of her friends, who were well ahead of her on the trail, stopped to check on her. They just carried on. Mary claims the creature was inside her mind, reading her thoughts. She got the sense that it was looking for information pertaining to technology. After it was done with her, it released her. She ran off to be with her friends. I've never remembered anything about that day until I was well into my 40s. My hopes are one day to be hypnotized to see if I have any memories of this gargoyle thing's technology, because as he was reading my brain, I could see his too. So that being said, there's no telling what memory of its technology I have. Both of these cases involve very young girls. They were with a group of friends, other children, and at the moment they fell behind and were left alone, this apparent gargoyle-like entity pounced. In the first case, the girl was left with missing time. In the second case, Mary's full memory of the incident did not return until 40 years later. The witness in the second case claims that it opened a type of two-way telepathic communication that allowed her to see into its mind as he looked into hers, as if the creature was unable to have that link go only one way. Surely it would not want her seeing what it knew. Granted, it did seem able to wipe her memory, so maybe it just didn't care. In 1934, young Juan Rivera Feliberti was flying a kite in a field outside of the town of Mayagüez in Puerto Rico when he suddenly felt something pulling on his kite. Looking up, he was surprised to see a silvery sphere about 20 feet in diameter, hovering almost directly over top of him. As he stared up at it, a beam of light exploded out of the object and moved directly at the witness, who began to float upwards into the craft. He was lowered into the sphere via an opening at the top. Inside, he saw a man wearing a dark green tight-fitting outfit sitting at a control panel, which had a shiny crystal resembling an emerald. Next to him stood a blonde girl with rosy skin and wearing a silvery outfit. She looked very young. She was holding Juan's kite in her hands. He was then taken into another room by the girl and shown a box that emitted certain images. The girl then showed Juan a little box full of colored buttons and asked him if he wanted to play with it. She then pressed some of the buttons on the box, and suddenly a cloud of spiraling smoke came out of it. The smoke took the form of a, quote, monkey-like creature. Soon more of these strange creatures took shape in the haze. Next, the girl asked Juan if he wanted to trade his kite for the box, and he, without hesitation, agreed. Eventually, Juan was deposited back onto the field. He landed on the ground with enough force that it twisted his ankle. The object zipped away. Juan returned home with the strange box. He kept it for several weeks. He managed to figure out the combination of buttons pushed, allowing for the monkeys to appear. At times he would entertain his friends by showing them these strange monkey creatures. The friends just assumed that it was some kind of a magic trick. Curiously, while his friends could clearly see the creatures, the grown-ups couldn't. It was these monkey creatures that ultimately led Juan to get rid of the box. He noted that they were uncontrollable, and after some time, they had all escaped from his room. One day, Juan decided that he'd had enough. He walked out to a nearby mountain with a shovel and buried it. Juan admits that the monkeys that had escaped from his room were probably still roaming around the forests of Puerto Rico even today. In an interesting coincidence, sometime in the late 1940s or early 1950s, monkeys were suddenly being sighted in the forests of Puerto Rico, even though they were not native to the area. The explanation given for the sudden appearance of the monkeys was that some had escaped from research laboratories. Granted, Juan's monkeys were only visible to a certain age group, apparently. And I have not been able to track down any Puerto Rican phantom monkey encounters circa the 1930s, so who knows. Juan would go on to have other encounters with the visitors, though none were as bizarre as his experience in 1934. Personally, I found this account fascinating, as it is one of the few cases I've read about in which the beings allowed the abductee to actually keep an item that might prove their existence. Recently, Albert Rosales sent me other cases involving strange boxes which were gifted to people by the visitors. The outcomes of these cases are as bizarre as you might expect, including one in which a woman was able to raise her deceased father from the dead.